The room went dead silent the moment the camera zoomed in on the cockpit. My sister dropped her phone. My mother covered her mouth. My father stood up from his armchair so fast he nearly knocked it over. And for the first time in years, nobody in that living room said a single word. The announcer's voice filled the room. Leading today's demonstration flight is Captain Ryan Calloway. My name, my face, my aircraft, broadcast live to millions of Americans. The same sister who had called me the family disappointment stared at the screen like she'd seen a ghost. The same parents who had spent years making excuses for her couldn't look away. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because the pilot crossing that sky wasn't some stranger. It was me, the son they'd written off. The brother they'd underestimated. The man they'd quietly stopped believing in. And the strangest part? I had never hidden any of it. They simply never cared enough to ask. To understand how we got there, you have to go back before the television cameras. Before the Air Force. Before the uniforms and the air shows. You have to go back to a small town in Ohio, to the moment my sister's golden reputation became the shadow I spent years trying to escape. My name is Ryan Calloway. I'm 35 now, but this story really starts when I was about 12 years old. Back then, everybody knew who Madison Calloway was. My older sister, 2 years older, 2 years more polished, 2 years more of everything my parents seemed to value. Honor roll, student council, piano recitals. Madison was the blueprint for success in her household. Teachers loved her. Relatives asked about her first. At every family gathering, her name came up before anyone even acknowledged I was in the room. I wasn't ignored exactly. I was just second. The funny thing is, I never resented her for it. Not back then. I actually looked up to her. She was smart, confident, driven. I wanted her approval the same way most younger siblings do. But Madison had a sharp edge. She always had. And once I started showing real interest in military aviation, once I started talking about flight school, officer training, serving my country, that edge turned toward me. Ryan, be realistic, she told me once at the dinner table. I was 17. You're not exactly Air Force material. Nobody corrected her. Mom looked at her plate. Dad cleared his throat. I sat there quietly, absorbing the silence like I always did. That silence became familiar over the years. When I enlisted after college, Madison laughed. Not cruelly, dismissively, which somehow felt worse. How long before you quit? She asked the day I loaded my car to leave. She didn't even look up from her laptop. I didn't argue. I just drove. Military life changed me fast. Not because it made me tougher, because it forced me to see how tough I already was. The first year was brutal. Long hours, relentless evaluations, competition from people who'd been preparing their whole lives. Nobody cared about your feelings. Nobody cared about your family dynamics. Results mattered. Performance mattered. Discipline mattered. And for the first time in my life, nobody compared me to Madison. I was just Captain Calloway, responsible for my own failures and my own wins. That freedom was something I hadn't known I was missing. Back home, the phone calls followed a predictable pattern. Mom would spend 15 minutes talking about Madison, her promotions, her apartment in the city, her weekend trips. Then she'd ask about me briefly, not out of malice, just habit. Years of family dynamics are hard to rewire. One Christmas, I came home on leave. Madison was there, polished as ever. At dinner, she gestured toward a military commercial on TV. Remember when you wanted to do something like that? She smiled. Good thing you have a backup plan. A few people chuckled. Nobody pushed back. I just smiled and kept eating. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped needing her approval. Not completely, but enough. Enough to keep moving. Enough to understand that her opinion was not my ceiling. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon at my base in Nevada. I read it once, then twice, then a third time, hands slightly unsteady because I couldn't quite believe what I was looking at. I had been selected for one of the most prestigious aviation demonstration assignments in the Air Force. The selection process was intensely competitive. Elite pilots from across the service applied. Many never made it. Some spent years chasing the same opportunity. My name was on the list. I sat alone at my desk for a long time, staring at the screen. No celebration, no applause, just a quiet room and a future I hadn't fully prepared myself to receive. That evening, I called my mother, told her I'd been selected for something major. "That's wonderful," she said, and I felt a flicker of hope. Then, almost immediately, "Oh, before I forget, Madison got a promotion this week." I hung up 20 minutes later and stared at the ceiling. Some things don't change overnight. The morning of the air show, I was in the cockpit before most people were out of bed. A few hundred miles away, my family had gathered in the living room. Madison was there. Apparently, she never missed a big air show broadcast, despite everything. My parents had coffee going. The television was on. None of them knew. When the broadcast switched to a featured segment and the camera followed me toward the aircraft, my father apparently stopped breathing. My mother leaned forward. Madison, according to what my dad told me later, went completely still. The announcer said my name. The room went silent. No one moved for several seconds. Years of assumptions about who I was, what I was capable of, how seriously to take my career collapsed in real time. Broadcast nationwide. Impossible to ignore. The next morning, Madison knocked on my door at the base. She looked like she hadn't slept. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said the words I never expected to hear from her. "I owe you an apology." We talked for over an hour. She admitted she had never taken my career seriously. Admitted that every time I moved forward, it quietly unsettled her. Not because she wanted me to fail, but because my persistence made her uncomfortable with her own judgments. It was easier to minimize me than to admit she'd been wrong. "I thought I knew you," she said finally. "You knew who I was at 17, I told her. You never got curious about who I became." She didn't have a response to that. She didn't need one. My family started paying attention after that. Slowly, genuinely. Mom called to ask about me, not as a warm-up to another Madison update, but because she actually wanted to know. Dad mailed me a newspaper clipping about military aviation with a handwritten note. "Saw this and thought of you." 12 words. I read them probably 20 times. And Madison? She changed too. Not all at once. Real growth rarely works that way. But the sharp edge softened. At a family dinner months later, she raised her glass toward me. "I was wrong about you, Ryan." I smiled. "You were wrong about a lot of things." She laughed. A real laugh, not a dismissive one. "Fair enough." The greatest victory wasn't appearing on national television. It wasn't earning my wings or proving anyone wrong. It was learning that my worth never depended on their recognition. Once I understood that, everything changed. Success felt lighter. Relationships became real. And the years I had spent quietly working, without applause, without an audience, turned out to be exactly the foundation I needed. If you've ever been underestimated by the people closest to you, remember this. Keep going. Their silence is not your verdict.